And now it's time for some things in the news that caught my eye. And of course, the big news out of Apple this week was their new Mac Pro. It kind of resembles the original Mac Pro in some ways. It's got that cheese grater look to it, but this one, of course, is very different and finally meets, I think, the standards that many professional users have been asking for. They really went nuts with this thing. It'll take about 1.5 terabytes of RAM. You can have 140 gigabytes per second of memory bandwidth, 6-channel memory on this thing. You can run a tremendous amount of graphical horsepower with it as well. It is just crazy how powerful this machine is. Unfortunately, though, it starts at $6,000 for the base model, which is way out of my price range, unfortunately, especially given that I don't need all that horsepower for what I do. But there are people who need this kind of performance, and they can now get it if they can afford it. And of course, those who would use this are very high-margin businesses like high-end TV and movie production, audio production houses, and other folks like that. And I think it's probably going to be something Apple will not sell a lot of, but will sell a good amount to keep those pro users happy. Now, another thing they did in addition to that computer, which starts at $6,000 and is estimated to go up to $35,000 fully decked out, you can also buy a really nice display. But unfortunately, these displays start at around $5,000 with the basic glass panel on it. And then they've got a special etched glass for a better image that will cost you $6,000. And what's crazy about this display is that the stand you see there is extra. So just to get the monitor mounted, you either have to pay $200 for a Visa mount or $1,000 for a stand, and you gotta check out the reaction from the crowd when they announced this right at the end of the product intro.
And the Pro stand, $999. And like the Mac Pro, they'll all be available in the fall.
So, as you can see there, it was even kind of dumbfounding the Apple fans in the room. And I know why they're doing this. I know why these customers are willing to pay this much, but it really is kind of peak Apple, I think, for what they're doing. I do hope, though, that a lot of what is being introduced here with the Mac Pro might work its way down to some of their more affordable products. I have an iMac that I bought and still use from about 3 or 4 years ago. It's doing everything I need for the production that I do on this show. My MacBook Pro that is almost 2.5, 3 years old now, also just fine. In fact, we have a MacBook Pro from 2012 that is still working great here on the channel. I don't need any of this stuff, but I'm hoping that Apple might look at some kind of modular option at the lower end, because one of the things that I'm very nervous about is if my iMac has a component go on it, I gotta lug the whole thing over to my Apple store 45 minutes away, drop it off, wait for them to fix it, and then go back and pick it up again. Whereas if I had a modular system where maybe a component died, like a GPU or a hard drive or something, it would be a lot easier to get that fixed. I think the Mac Mini is probably the best solution at this point for those of us who don't want that all-in-one solution like an iMac, but it's still not as good as what they've introduced here with the Tower. Minus, of course, the $1,000 monitor stand and everything else that goes along with it. Years ago, the Mac Pro was available at an entry point, and I'm hoping at some point maybe they'll do something similar for those of us who just don't need all of this horsepower, but would like a modular Mac to work with. Now, one thing that really intrigued me was the Afterburner card. This is designed for people doing really high-end 4K and 8K video. And what it allows people to do is bring in raw data from their fancy 8K cameras and process, I think, 3 streams of raw video in real time at 8K, which is something I don't think any PC can really do right now without having to transcode into some proxy media. And this is an area where people that are doing that level of high-end production are going to save a lot of money, because you don't have to take the time to bring in all that media, transcode it for ingestion, edit it, and then match everything back up with your mainline clips for final encoding. You can actually work off the original files right out of the camera, and I think it's going to speed up a lot of workflows for folks. And this has an FPGA that is managing that video flow. Now, of course, we're seeing a lot of FPGAs in the retro gaming world, like the Mister project, which we did some videos on, and the analog consoles. And these are chips that are massively parallel. They're very well tuned for this kind of work where you've got a lot of different things happening at once that all have to be done at the same time. Great execution here. And there's been some talk as these FPGA chips have been coming down in price. What might we see happen with them? Well, here's a great example of that. Now, one thing that I've been using an FPGA with for video production for some time is my TriCaster. That is what I use to make the videos that you see every single day here on the channel. That has an FPGA that does all of the real-time video processing when I'm shooting this video and everything else that I do. The TriCaster, by the way, is also a $6,000 device, but it was worth it for me because it really is a tool that speeds up my workflow and I could justify the cost of purchasing it. And this thing certainly has paid for itself over the years without question. My channel grew tremendously because of the ability of the TriCaster to make my workflow much more efficient. So that's a good purchase, but for me a Mac Pro would not be, given that I don't need that level of efficiency for my editing. But it's pretty cool to see what's happening out there and how these FPGAs are making their way into products we all might use one day.
This channel is brought to you by the Lon.TV supporters, including gold-level supporters, the Four Guys with Quarters podcast, Tom Albrecht, Brian Parker, and Kalyan Kumar. If you want to help the channel, you can by contributing as little as $1 a month. Head over to Lon.TV/support to learn more. And don't forget to subscribe. Visit Lon.TV/s.